Welcome to the Sunriver Anglers Fly Tying Corner, where each month we bring you a new fly pattern to give a try to on our Central Oregon lakes and rivers. In addition to showing you how to tie each pattern, I'll feature fishing technique tips and tricks, and I'll cover some of the entomology behind each pattern to help gain a better understanding of the bugs that we're trying to imitate. I have field tested each of the patterns that I feature each month to make sure that they catch fish. I'll cover tying instructions for the fly as well as materials to help you be able to recreate these patterns on your own vise. For this month's pattern, I'm going to tie a black and red balanced leech. This is a really quick and easy to tie pattern, and one that has been very effective for me out on Crane Prairie and up at East Lake and some of the other still waters that we fish locally here in Central Oregon. So before we get started tying, let me cover the materials that I've used on this pattern. I'll cover them one by one to help you understand specifically why I chose each. For a hook, I'm using a Firehole 5/16 size 14. You can tie this pattern in, I'd say size 10 to 14. This hook is a competition barbless jig hook, and it works really well for balanced leeches. I like the short shank because I'm going to add some shank length when I tie in the pin and the bead. For the thread, I'm going to use UTC Ultra thread in black, and that's a 140 denier thread. For the bead, I'm using a Firehole matte black tungsten bead in a size 3/32. The size of bead is less important than the color of the bead and also the balance of the bead on the fly. You can use brass or you can use tungsten. A brass bead is, you'll have to push the bead a little farther out to get it to balance, whereas a tungsten bead you can shorten it up a bit. So your choice, you can use a little larger bead, but as we tie this on, the important part is getting it balanced. For the peg, I'm going to use just a regular old sewing pin, and I'm going to clip this off with a pair of wire clippers about a 1/2 inch long, and then feed the bead onto that pin, and we'll tie that on the hook itself. You'll see that in the video. For the tail, I'm going to use just simple marabou, black marabou, and I'll cut off a bunch of this and trim it to size to tie on the fly. And for the dubbing on the body, I'm going to use a dubbing blend called Bruiser Blend Junior, and this is in black red. I get this from a shop in Orem, Utah called Flyfish Food, and it's an excellent color for a leech pattern or a black-red leech pattern like we're tying today. So let's get started tying this pattern. I'm going to begin by tying my thread on right up toward the bend in the hook, and go ahead and fill in the entire shank of the hook so I've got a place for that pin to lay when we tie it in. So now I've clipped off my pin and I've fed the bead onto that pin, and I'll tie it in right at the front of the hook and wind that all the way back to the back, taking care not to cross that area that I cut with wire clippers, otherwise I'll shear my thread. Now let me show you how we balance this pattern. I'm going to feed in some wire into the eye of the hook and just turn it upside down and see how it balances. I would expect the balance to be a little bit front heavy at this point because remember we're going to tie some materials on to bring that back into balance. Once you've tied a few of these, you'll develop an eye for exactly where to place that bead. You won't have to balance each one. So let me tie my thread back on and let's get started tying the rest of the fly. So I'm going to select some marabou and then I'll peel off about the right amount for the tail, and I'll clump it together or bunch it together and clip off the excess before I tie it on, measuring right against the bead. And the length of the tail should probably be about the length of the body. So let me tie this in and wind it all the way back to the tail set position. You'll note I tied right over the back of that pin, and the marabou protects my thread when I tie this in. So next, I'm going to start spinning some dubbing on the thread, and I'm going to capture just a few fibers, tie them onto the hook, and then I'll spin the rest of the fibers around my thread to create a yarn. Then I'm going to take my dubbing brush and I'm going to brush this material out to leave a lot of trailing fibers that will create the flowing leech effect in the water. And in tying in the dubbing, I like to use the rotary feature on my vise, and so I'm gonna spin the vise around while holding that dubbing noodle and go ahead and wrap it all the way up to the very head of the fly. And once I reach there, I can immediately drop into a whip finish and finish off the head. Now, one of the subtle little changes I make to this is I'm going to go ahead and use a Sharpie and paint over in black on that pin and darken it up so I don't have this real bright shiny pin on the head of my fly. The very last step in this pattern is I'm going to again get my dubbing brush and I'm going to brush the body out to expose some of those longer flowing fibers that help give this leech life in the water. So let me spin the black and red balanced leech around in the vise so you can see all sides of it. This has been a really good pattern lately, and I've enjoyed fishing it. It is a fish catcher. So that has been your Sunriver Anglers Fly Tying Corner for this month. I hope you'll give the black and red balanced leech a try. It is a good pattern. If you like what you see, please subscribe to this YouTube page and also visit us on Facebook at Sunriver Anglers. Thanks for watching.